Welcome, everyone. Just an opportunity to give you some updates on what's happening with school, what we're thinking about returning in person, and we'll talk through what we know and what we don't know, and what our goals are, and what we can do as a community together to get back to in person. And if you're doing distance learning, get back to our distance learning option as it stood in the first part of the year. So, welcome. We'll get started. As always, nice to start with a little bit of learning, very little bit. Those of you may know this week's Parshat Shavua, Vayeshev. We see Joseph telling his brothers about his dream, his vision, and then we see him go through a series of tumultuous, mostly downs, but some ups and downs. Tells his brothers, ends up in a ditch, thinks that he's going, or they think he's going to be killed. He ends up getting sold as a slave. Then he is accused of adultery, and then he's in prison, and then he's helping people interpret their dreams. And we know he will rise in Egypt. And it's his story very much, if we want to look at it broadly, as a story of this vision and a story of resilience. And if you think about our progress together as a community, making our way through this pandemic, I think we've all felt those ups and downs, and have to keep an eye on that vision to see us through the end, whenever that may be. Probably won't be a sudden ending, but rather an ending that we'll have to gradually get towards over the next few months or however long it takes. So 3 major takeaways I'd like us to walk away with today. Number 1, our goal is to return to in-person learning for all grades on January 4th. I'm going to say this caveat every time that I speak, but of course, we always need to be prepared that can shift. But for now, that is our goal. And when we communicate in the future, we'll be communicating how we are preparing to return on the 4th. Should that change, or should there be a change, we will communicate, of course, ASAP. And I think part of the covenant that we have trying to get students into school is that it is going to require flexibility and some last minute planning for all of us. So I do ask that you plan for any eventuality throughout the rest of this pandemic. But for now, our goal and our hope is to get back to in-person learning on January 4th. 2, we're all going to need to do our part to maximize our chances of returning in person. If our default and our goal and our hope is to have some students be able to learn in person, we are all going to have to do our part to maximize our chances, whether it's January 4th, whether it's January 18th, whether it's March, whether it's June. We are all going to have to do our part to maximize our chance of returning. And that's to say that you have been, teachers have been all doing their part to this point. And we're going to reinforce that tonight and ask people to continue to committing to doing our part. A big part of that will be when we are ready to roll it out, which will be in the coming days, using our new communication tool, which will help us gather data in a more centralized and quick way, allowing us to be transparent, proactive with information, help families faster, and help teachers faster understand who's in school, who's out of school, and why. Because we have very limited resources in our health office, and this will help us absolutely streamline our communication when people begin to use our new communication tool. I'm going to ask, when it is sent out, you're not going to have to understand the communication tool by the end of tonight. I will do a brief overview. We have a beta site that is set up, and you can see what it will look like, but you do not need to understand the communication tool tonight, but just get a sense of what it looks like. When we roll it out, it will be rolled out with various instructions and directives that can help you navigate the site. But we will ask that you start playing with it and start using it immediately, even though we are still in distance learning. A few factors thinking about returning to in-person school. Of course, we need to understand the metrics that are out of our control. We need to leverage what is within our control, and that is what I primarily want to focus on tonight. And we need to limit risk and elements of chance, which our communication tool will play a large part in doing that. What's outside our control, just a broad overview, of course, COVID infection rates, COVID case rates, and COVID hospitalizations. Not necessarily within our control. Perhaps there are some things we can do. We can all play our part, but those numbers are not necessarily within our control. And we'll talk about the role of those at the very end in terms of decision making. What is within our control and what I want to focus on? Best practices for limiting exposure to COVID within Highlight Your households. Highlight Your households includes all households of staff members, households of students. I met with the staff today and gave them a brief overview of what I was going to speak about. And this is really, again, our commitment as a community, our commitment to our teachers, our commitment to our fellow students and staff members is that we are following the CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health guidelines in terms of gatherings, in terms of mask wearing, in terms of hand washing, in terms of travel, in terms of all the recommendations that we've seen. I'm asking all our families to double down on making sure that you are following the best practices for limiting exposure, not allowing, to the extent possible, of course, it's not possible to fully keep COVID from coming into households, but it is December 8th tonight. We are hoping to be back on January 4th. That gives us plenty of time to limit exposure. That means no play dates. That means not mixing with other families. That means not having large gatherings. I know these are still sacrifices. These are hard sacrifices, but I'm asking all of us to make them. Continuing and building on the mitigation methods inside the building. These have been working very well. And I'll talk a little bit about those in a moment. And to the extent possible, keeping COVID out of the building, primarily focused on symptomatic cases, of course. And I'll talk a little bit about the role or how we might look at asymptomatic cases, but we are mostly focused on people who tested positive through other means or had tests for other reasons, but keeping symptomatic or those who have tested positive or been exposed to COVID out of the building. Limiting exposure, I spoke about this. Again, I'm asking you to speak as families, as households. How are we following the CDC and Minnesota Department of Health guidelines? Are we keeping up to date on those, and are we following them? Using common sense, of course, and that is required, and we all are humans who live in this world, and that we have needs and things we need to do in this world, but using common sense along with those, and an overabundance of caution. I wrote abundance of caution, but an overabundance of caution is really what we're asking for at this point, because we have found that students being in school has had a significant and positive impact on their learning. There are still some who are doing distance learning, and I think they're getting out of that what they need, and I appreciate that, and that's a tough decision. And those that are in school are getting a tremendous amount from being in school in person, even though it is a great sacrifice for many to be able to make that happen. Mitigation measures, this is more a reminder. There's not a lot new here, but it's been working. As I said, we've had very few cases at school. Partly that's due to the fact that what we've seen throughout the pandemic is that there is minimal transmission, child to adult of COVID, as far as we have seen. That also helps, but masks, distancing, pods, I believe our distance weeks have played a strong part in our maintaining a healthy school, hand washing, and we've spoken about lunch a bit. We've never felt that lunch was unsafe, but it certainly is a time that we have unmasked students together, talking, laughing, doing their lunch thing, eating, and we are going to work on some updated lunch protocols to try to mitigate the amount of time the masks are off or how many students are together eating. We're still working on those measures, but we have a few weeks to get to them, and that will be part of our plan. Again, it's been working so far for the most part, but we're going to try to add a few more measures in there for just to be extra cautious. And in terms of testing, we are not currently looking at what some schools are doing, which is sort of mass proactive testing. We haven't needed it to this point. There are some issues that come along with mass proactive testing. And when I say that, I mean, there may be a place for testing, particularly when it comes to travel. Obviously, if someone has known exposure or potential exposure, and it is not off the table that we would partner with some testing agency and do some proactive testing before people come back or while people are back, but that's not currently what we are considering doing. There are some issues that come with testing, as I mentioned. There's a cost issue, which if that alone were the issue, I think we would probably try to find ways around it or fundraise around it. But there are several other issues. Just the national system for testing has not been all that strong. And I don't believe that that's necessarily something we need to or should rely on for getting people back into the building. But again, it's on the table. Our health and safety committee will continue to look at that as a tool. But right now, that is not our plan. Keeping COVID out of the building. This will be the first change you're going to see. And there, you'll understand the reasoning behind it when I roll out the tool and we look at the tool together, the central communication tool. Daily screening is an absolute necessity. It is an absolute necessity. Taking temperature, everyone taking their temperatures, first thing in the morning, screening for symptoms, interviewing your children, staff checking with yourselves, and you need to do that checklist, and you need to commit to doing that checklist, every family. But we are not going to do the daily reporting tool for those who are symptom free. We are expecting and requiring that you are doing the screening on your own, a proactive report that says that everything has checked out. We're expecting you to do that. So that will be happening every day. In the new communication tool, again, this is keeping COVID out of the building, it will be for reporting, and this is our second change. Instead of what families have been doing, which again, I appreciate so much the communication from families to this point. I think everyone has done an excellent job, really. Staff and parents have done an excellent job communicating with us, but it's been not consistent in terms of the location or the language that has been coming to us, or the understanding of at what point or what time will our nurse's office get back to you. So we are trying to work on tightening a lot of that. And that this new communication tool will help. This is the big change. The new communication tool will be for reporting all matters of health, all matters related to COVID, absences, and that's non-health related absences. I imagine there will be very few of those that you would be reporting. Everything else, the absence will be assumed because there will be symptoms or a COVID related matter. Late arrivals, that would be dentist appointments, other things, early dismissals, travel, and returning to school after illness. And I'm going to speak again a little bit about travel when I talk a little bit about give you the bullet points or the highlights for the new communication tool. So we'll go more into the new communication tool in a moment, and that's the meat of what I'll be talking about for the rest of the time I'll be talking. And keeping students home until communication from the nurse's office, if there is any remaining doubt after reporting has been done. So you'll see when you have a chance to play around with the new communication tool, you'll see that there will be some descriptions of what do I do next. And if there is any doubt, if your situation is not covered, we're going to ask you that you keep your child and the siblings home until you hear from the nurse, and that maybe after the school day has started. This is part of our sacrifice of getting students into school and keeping COVID out of the building. This is our commitment to our teachers, to making sure that we're doing what we can, and our commitment to each other to keeping COVID out of the building. So the new communication tool, here are some of the highlights. We'll be rolling it out in the coming days. It will come with an extensive cover letter that will tell you what it's for, how to use it, and what we'll ask is that you read that thoroughly. Of course, it is a one-stop shop for all matters of health, COVID, absence, late arrival, early dismissal, travel, and returning to school after illness. Now, travel. We are going to ask, beginning immediately, as soon as the tool is rolled out, there is you'll see there's a button that says we're reporting travel. I'm going to ask you to click on that even if you're not sure that what you've done or what your household member has done constitutes travel. That's a big question. What is travel? If I drove to Wisconsin for an hour and came back, is that travel? We're going to try to make it clear what things we're constituting as travel that would require perhaps some action. But if you have any doubt, or you have done any traveling, or a household member has done any traveling, click on the link. We are asking you to begin that immediately so we can start collecting data. It will also help us figure out exactly how we want to respond. I do want you to be prepared. Families who have traveled, families who have a household member who has traveled, particularly out of state, I do want you to be prepared that it is possible, and we will roll this out similarly at a similar time as the new communication tool, exactly what our plan is, but it is possible there will be a quarantine required after travel. The guidelines from the CDC are changing, and from the state are changing around that. They've changed, I believe, from 14 days to 10 days or 7 days with a negative test, which is where testing may come in. We're going to review that. Our Katie, the nurse, and I and our health committee will review these policies. But I just want you all to hear now that those that are traveling, what I would suggest you either reconsider travel, change your travel plans, or be prepared that we may need a quarantine, and we may require a quarantine upon return from travel. More on that will come out as soon as we can communicate. But I just wanted you to start preparing for that now and think about whether or not you had to make any change of plans. What we are going to do when we've heard from families is we are going to reach back out directly. So what you're going to hear, because every situation is not going to be equal. Just like everything in COVID, there are mitigating circumstances for everything. And we may just communicate out to you. You may hear from Kay that says, no, that doesn't constitute travel, you're fine. Or it's very clear that you've taken the measures you needed to take. I can't imagine how we would know that. But whatever circumstance we discover from that information, we are going to use on a case-by-case basis. But everyone should be prepared that there may be some form of quarantine. Better safe than sorry. This is a major paradigm shift, this communication tool. This is the only initial communication tool you should use, unless it is, of course, an academic or programmatic matter. Then, as always, your first or social, your first matter, your first communication should, of course, if it's academic or school program or social emotional related, should go to the homeroom teacher or the advisor. That is always true. But in cases of health, in cases of absences, this is the only tool you should use. We will communicate directly with the staff member. And so in the past, if you think about how it worked in the past, if you emailed the teacher and Maya and front desk, and then the teacher got back to you, it's exactly the same thing, except we're going to do that communication. And then the teacher will reach back out at the appropriate time to say, here's what you need to do because you're absent. So it might require a little patience at first. And this is why I'm going to ask that you start using the tool immediately upon receiving it, even though we are in distance learning, so we can understand what it feels like to get that data and figure out our internal communication systems and make sure that they're working properly by January 4th. As I've said before, the default should be to keep your child and siblings home if there is any doubt after you've used the communication tool. This is another change. So I want to pinpoint another change. Returning to school after illness will require coordination with the nurse's office. So you will know after we've communicated. So you've reported a sore throat. You hear from Katie at 9:30 a.m. We talk through what the plan is. You get a strep test. They confirm it's definitely not COVID, let's say. You believe your child is returning on Thursday. There will be a reporting for returning to school. We do not want to see children return after an illness without you reporting at this stop. You click on the button, you report that they're returning. It should jive with what we already know. If it doesn't, we will reach out and ask further questions. This helps us assure the classroom teacher that there has been, and again, families in that class, that there has been a process for returning. I want to say people have been excellent. There have been 1 or 2 cases that there was some cross communication, but this is not in response to families or anyone doing anything wrong. It is just a chance to make it more streamlined, more organized in a way that we can really track this data and follow up carefully. Also, we will replace some all community COVID communications. We've used an overabundance of transparency and caution. If an ECC teacher, we hear that an ECC teacher tested positive, there's been no exposure at all for our families or our staff. What we're going to do is keep a dashboard page and we will keep that updated, but there will be some communication we aren't going to continue to do. However, if there is any chance of exposure, we will communicate. So you still will receive probably 2/3 of the amount of COVID communications, that there has been positive COVID cases. That's what that last bullet means, is when we report that there has been an actual positive COVID case somewhere in the building or in the school. So again, out of an abundance of caution, we will still let families know if we feel there's any chance of exposure to siblings or to the child themselves. But if there is not any chance of that, then we're just going to use our dashboard and we're just going to gather that data for our own knowledge and use. And again, for the new communication tool, report all travel starting now. So even if you traveled at the beginning of this break or for Thanksgiving, we want you to report that. Everything that started at Thanksgiving on, we want to hear what travel has been occurring. This also just gives us data and helps us understand we are not here to judge. We are here to get real information so we can make good decisions, solid decisions based on the information that we have, and then we will reach out. And again, if you said I traveled a week ago, you might just hear from our nurse's office eventually saying, okay, thank you for letting us know. It's been 3 weeks since you traveled and you're fine to come back without any further quarantine or testing. Okay, so I'm going to actually escape out of this and I'm going to give you a preview of this site. You will be able to access it. Again, this will all come with the communication. You will be able to access this through Sycamore. It's just a link and it will take you to this site. Julie, can you confirm with me that this is still visible? It is, okay. So here it is. This is the beta version. We're still working on it. Many people have worked on this over the last couple of weeks. I very much appreciate it. It's starting to really come together beautifully. On the left here, you'll see some quick links. You'll have a link, it will take you to this page and you'll have options. Reporting a positive COVID-19 test, of course. So that means anyone's tested positive in the household, you'll be able to read this. Reporting COVID exposure. Now typically when there's been exposure, let's say a parent comes home and says, my work told me I was exposed. That's not going to affect whether or not, very likely it's not going to affect whether a student can come into school, and we'll actually have some information for you to read and study. So we don't have to answer that for you. The reason that's there is that we've actually had this question come up a lot. And so we thought we should have a place to report it. And also it gives us more data, and the more data we have, the better decisions we can make. And if we're seeing lots and lots of exposure, it could be a factor in some of the decisions we have to make down the road because we know that COVID could be coming into households. Better to have more data. When you play with the site, you'll see what that link is for. Reporting any symptoms. The key this portion here is that this is really the replacement for the daily screening, because you've done your daily screening. We've all done it. I do it. You've done it for all your children. And then there are symptoms. So you click here to report. And I'm going to take you through a couple of the links. Again, they're still being worked on. So they're probably actually running a little bit slowly because some of these things are still being put together. Take a second to load. It's coming up. Yeah, because it's not a live site yet. So it will give you some information. You'll have read this in advance, of course, but this will look very familiar to you. If you're seeing these symptoms, which really any symptoms we want you to report and stay home and keep siblings home unless the instructions tell you otherwise. And you'll fill out a very short form, just letting us know what's going on. And you will hear, and there are instructions about who you will hear from and when you will hear from us next. Back to reporting other absences, non-health related, late arrival, early pickup. So this is a new system. Like I said, you have a dentist appointment scheduled. You're going to be going here to report that. That's how we're going to inform teachers and others that need to know. But these are for, maybe you're taking part in, your child is taking part in their cousin's bat mitzvah. They may be out for half a day. So this is where you're going to report that. And then here is what I was speaking about before, return to school form. So this will be required the night before a return at any point. And hopefully it will be very clear. We've already communicated, looks like everyone's back Friday. It's just a redundant process to help us know who's coming back into the building, and that all the communications and all the I's have been dotted and all the T's have been crossed. So this is a redundant process in its ideal form. This is where we'll ask you to report travel. As soon as the tool is rolled out, I'm going to ask all families, if you've been traveling, if you have traveled, if you plan to travel over this period of time, I'm going to ask, and actually beyond, that you click here and you'll click at this spot and you'll report it. We'll continue to work on, if you have other questions, nurse-related questions, you can always use nurse@hmjds.org or email Katie directly, but this is a good place for us to consolidate questions, and we'll have some information available for you here too, maybe just some quick facts, flow charts, new information, and as I mentioned, a dashboard that can be available to help us track cases that are connected to Highlitcher and other information. So that is the overview. Like I said, you will have plenty of time to play with this yourself. I ask you to look at it immediately. Please let friends know, pass it along when this is rolled out. I really want people playing with it, looking at it, and starting to use it immediately. And we'll cover that again in the cover letter. So after I'm done here, we will open up for some questions. I'm gonna check the time. Looks like we're at a good time. We'll try to do about half an hour if we can. Summary, we're planned to return on January 4th. Our goal is to get children into school. We feel that this has been a really strong part of our school year. That is the default. We will, when I say we will only communicate if there's change, I don't mean we won't be communicating between now and then, because I think we will be communicating, and there will be schedules and there'll be information. But what I mean is that our default decision will be returning. There will only be a communication ASAP about whether or not we're returning if it looks like the tide is changing at all on that decision. And I do want you to know that you should be prepared for that. We should all be prepared for that. And I know that that's hard to hear, and that's not what people want to hear. And I commend families on their incredible malleability throughout this time. And this has been really hard, and it's probably still going to be hard for a while. But if our goal is to get students into school, then that's a commitment worth making, I think. Again, a reminder and a request and a real push for you to take all precautions recommended by the CDC and by the Minnesota Department of Health. Keep updated on the latest research. Do what you can. Stay masked, stay distanced, small groups, households, do everything you can. Using the new reporting tool, this is to be used at all times. Another thing we were seeing, and this is another reason behind the communication tool, is that people didn't know if they should report just during school days or a Sunday night. Of course, not to be used on Shabbat or other holidays, but we are asking you to use this reporting tool. If we have a distance week and your child has symptoms, we want you to use the reporting tool. Because one, we do need to look back and understand if there was any potential exposure. And two, it gives us data. So we're not trying to pry into your lives, but we need this reporting tool to be used by our community. And this is the way you're going to communicate with the school. And it's the way we're going to know what's happening out in the world of our families. And in terms of factors for considering a term, because I know that will be a question. I know you're curious. Again, it goes back to those things that there are those things that are out of our control that may cause worry. We believe that's basically what the authorities on the pandemic to this point have been saying, is that they really want us to try to keep schools open and get schools open. That the tide has been turning more and more in that in America. As long as the state is doing its part and keeping other things closed, and we're all doing our part, we're really going to look at that strongly. Yes, do I want to see numbers flattening out in the state and hospitalizations particularly going down? That is an important number. I think that it impacts people psychologically, emotionally, and practically speaking, should there be any emergencies at the school or anywhere. So there are other factors we need to consider. I will be looking, and I and my leadership team and the health committee will be looking at those numbers that are not within our control. But we are no longer just going by that 50, the number that the MDH put out in terms of cases per 100,000. We're looking at a multitude of factors and the best recommendations that are out there and how our own community is doing. So we're going to continue to assess those factors. And in an ideal world, we are definitely seeing numbers decline. I want to just remind you, transmission rates from and among children has been consistently low throughout the pandemic. I know that we have grades that go a little older than that. Numbers have still been pretty low. Middle school numbers have not been, they haven't been at the level of high schools or colleges. So we are seeing very low transmission rates, which is one of the big reasons that people like Dr. Fauci are recommending that schools can really try to be open. So that is, it's been working. It's been working because of the tremendous work of our families and the tremendous work of our staff. And this is our community goal. So without further ado, I do want to, what I'm going to do is just ask you to use I'm going to escape out of this, stop sharing, And I'm going to ask that you use the raising hand function. So if you click on, those of you that don't know the raising hand function, if you click on participants, where it says participants at the bottom, where there's a little people icon, and then if you move your eyes over to the right, where there's a list of participants at the bottom of that, you should see something that says raise hand. And so that's how you can raise your hand. And then I'll just call on you, and Julie will unmute and we'll hear your question. And I'd ask that you try to keep questions as general as possible. I don't want to get into too many specifics about our situation is this or you know, whatever, but if needed, or if you think it's global, I'm happy to try. And also try to keep your questions kind of relatively short if you can, so we can get as many in as possible. Okay, so Amit is first, Julie.
Hi, thank you for the new plan and for all this information. This is really helpful to kind of try to think forward. I have a question about thinking even a little bit further forward. There have been some adjustments to the schedule over the last few months that have kind of come in fairly last minute. I was wondering whether you were already thinking about the calendar for 2021 and specifically midwinter break. Is a biggie in terms of family planning. So if you have any knowledge of that at this point, that would be great.
Can I just clarify, Amit, 2021 for the school year?
Right, no, I mean like January. Like
this school year, okay.
Like the post-January 4th planning.
It's funny, just because on our agendas for our leadership meeting today, we're talking about next year's calendar. So yeah. You know, the answer is that our operations team, which consists of teacher leaders and administration, looks at those kinds of things. I don't have a specific answer of whether or not we've looked at making any changes particularly. The only thing we're really exploring a little bit is the current distance weeks, and whether or not we need to make any shifts in those. But as of now, no, we do not have any, we're not planning on making any changes beyond January 4th. And we will do our best to communicate as quickly as we can. You know, I guess an apology can come across the wrong way, but I do know it's very tough, and I do apologize to families that they've had to shift, and we've done the best we can. Everyone's been very understanding, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I can't quite tell who Goldberstein. Okay.
I think you're good.
Hi, thanks, Yoni, and thanks you know, obviously all the staff on for all of this. One question that we have is, what is the thinking behind not requiring daily symptom reports from everybody going forward?
Yeah, you know, it hasn't really, I don't think it's really had the desired effect. I'll be honest, it hasn't been used entirely universally. I'm just going to be really transparent about that. We're going to push for other ways of advertising, screenings, and talking to families, doing some spot checking. I just don't find that it's been the most effective tool. When our internal staff is limited, so when we're gathering that information, we're like looking at it pretty late. You know, to track it all, we have to look back at old data and say, okay, this family's done it the last 4 days. It's just not really been the most practical tool. I'm open to keeping it going, and I'm open, you know, by the way, we have such smart families and great families, and you guys might have a great idea for replacing that or going on a campaign to put it back. I'm totally open to it. I think our families have been, I think, whether we have the reporting tool or not, because one of my philosophies has sort of all the way been through, if we can't enforce it, it's a little hard to put in place. And so there's not much enforcement that we can really do of that. And it's extra bureaucratic work, and maybe also gives a false sense of security in a different sense. So I think I'm open to reinstating it. I'll actually, you know, it was a decision to simplify communication too, because and that's another piece, because when we were looking at all the different things you need to communicate, it's like there's this proactive communication, and then there's reactive communication, and it's on a different site, it's a different, so it's kind of a simplification thing, and we are who we are, but let me mull it over a little bit, and I'm open to kind of having something in place. It's not to take away the accountability, but on the other hand, again, we can only follow the accountability in the way we can. Thank you. Matt.
Hey there.
appreciate all your hard work very much. I'm sure a lot of us would love to see them come back to school in January. I'm not so optimistic that the metrics or things that we're looking at are going to improve. What gives you the optimism that that the school would be open given that the situation isn't going to improve?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I wouldn't say optimism is a word that people would use. I mean, I'm an optimistic human being, but in COVID cases, I've been pretty, I hope, pragmatic. I feel there is at least a good chance that through the measures that the state has taken, we will see flattened numbers. I think flattened numbers give us an opportunity to try to go for it and be open. I also think that if we put these other mitigation methods in place, or these other screening methods, it widens our berth a bit. So I don't know if the numbers will go down. I don't know if they'll skyrocket. I do know if they skyrocket, that's where we will really see our greatest concern. Max capacity of hospitals, major red alarms, from the governor. So I don't necessarily have a golden reason for optimism. What I think is that the measures that the state has put in place, as long as people are starting to follow them, will give us a good chance to see a significant decrease in the rate of how things were looking before we took off in Thanksgiving. And at that point, it was just rampant out of control, and we had not heard much from the government. So we have started to hear from the government. We have started to hear information about schools being open, even in states that have pretty widespread surges. And I will say Minnesota, I think, is number 2 in states of surges, and we have schools that are open and that have been doing fine. And so, in some ways, I mean, I commend them, and those schools were either felt confident in what they were doing or were canaries in the coal mine, but it's been working. And so I think that the combination of those factors, Matt, give me some optimism, to use your word. Is that enough of an answer for now? And we can follow up on that more if you'd like, and I'd like to hear your thoughts down the road. Zahara.
Can you say a little more about the distance learning? You said you've already seen benefits in the time since school has started, and then like what the real motivation, because I saw the motivation kind of varying over time. Like I thought one of the greatest benefits of the distance learning was it allowed us to do test runs for when we had to move into full distance learning. But now that we've really ironed out a lot of those kinks, I was wondering what the benefits are of having distance weeks.
Well, I'd say a little bit is like things are working. So one of my comments was actually, he picked up on it, was like, it's working. So I kind of like keeping what we're doing to some extent. So
in what sense working though? Do you think it?
Well, meaning, I'm sorry, it's not a scientific term. I mean, school has been going well in terms of cases, and we've been doing a good job. So making changes to our patterns, it makes me a little bit nervous, even though, but there's no necessarily data around that. So that's not the right correlation. I understand all the data people are going to look at me and throw tomatoes. That's one piece. But the other thing is, so just saying like having that time apart, knowing that if symptoms develop what I mean by that is what our initial idea was, that if over those 9 days symptoms develop, we know people stay out of school. It's helpful to have some time apart. So that's where part of where it came from before. There are other practical reasons that those are helping us. I mean, one is there is an element of rest for the administrative staff, and honestly for the teachers to some extent. It changes the patterns up. Now, not all teachers will agree. Some will say they much prefer being in person, but that week does allow a different kind of schedule, and that's related to the health. It might not be related directly to COVID exposure, right? But related to the overall health of the school and the health of the staff at the school. And, I don't speak much about this in the broader meetings, but from an administrative standpoint, our administration is taking on a lot of duties in school, and this isn't a woe is me thing, it's our jobs. But it slowed down some of the other things that need to get done that really only get done during those distance weeks. So it's kind of a sacrifice that we've all needed to make. On the other hand, as we did before, we are willing, or we tried before, we are willing to maybe play around and maybe eliminate some of those if we can. So I'm still exploring those. I like that they're in place. sometimes there's just a benefit of something that is a little hard to quantify, but we're always discussing it and open to it, and that's a constant conversation internally in the school. So we are having those conversations, and thankfully we did identify some issues, I think, or some areas we could improve in some grade levels for distance learning during those. So I think it was helpful, but yes, we're still exploring the efficacy of those is my short answer.
Okay.
Thanks.
I believe
Marie?
Marie was next.
Yeah.
Hi, Yoni and everyone. Thanks so much for putting this together. First of all, I really appreciate the continued transparency throughout this whole process and the effort all of the staff has put into this and keeping everyone safe. And we really hope to be able to be back in school as well. I wanted to ask what the school is, I don't want to call it policy, but how is the school going to address extracurricular activities where I know a lot of students up to this point have participated in extracurricular activities, whether they've been indoor or outdoors. I'm assuming most of them have been masked, but there is an element of control that we don't have over what organizations do outside of our school, and possible exposure that the students have in those activities and then bringing that into the school. Is anything going to change about that come January 4th, or what are you going to recommend parents to do?
It's a really great question, and we've been more focused on travel than anything else in terms of like looking at policy. And actually, to give you a really, the best answer I can give you is to say I actually want to spend a little time and talk to my leadership team and the health committee about a policy that we could, or how to get a better answer out to our community about that. And that is just something I'm going to write it down, just that we will address. I think I am not at all shy about asking families or telling families we don't want you doing that. And I actually think our families, if I said don't do it, I think most families actually honestly wouldn't. I left a window open that said people should make their own decisions. Look at the program. How is the program handling its health protocols? I want to look at it a little bit more closely, see what's open out there. Extracurricular activities, I think, were shut down to a large extent before Thanksgiving, but maybe not broadly all over. I know private schools had some options to keep theirs open and some closed. So I guess there are still options for extracurricular activities. I need to understand the landscape a little bit better to answer your question. I wish I could answer it here. I do discourage it. I'll just say that right now on this call. I would discourage it. When this started, I really leaned more towards trying to best understand holistic health, and I still do. I still understand there is a holistic health, but I also think that as we are perhaps getting closer to seeing an end or an end game or the beginning of an end game, who knows what that is, with vaccines coming out and hopefully people taking measures seriously. I think that it might be time to double down a little bit more on keeping COVID out of the building, but I do think our measures have been working really well. So let me explore. I want to give you a real answer to that, explore a little bit deeper. I do not have an answer for that right now. And the fact is you actually emailed me about it and I still didn't have an answer. I didn't say I was going to have one right here, but I will work on that and try to get that included in the post communication. It might not be ready by then, but I'll try to get that in one of our next communications to get some policies or at least some recommendations out if we're not going to make it policy. And then you'll know that that's not the policy we're doing. So not the most sufficient answer, but it's on the radar.
I think Elizabeth Lamon was next.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much. One thing that I've heard some other schools have done is that to take kind of a distance learning week right after winter break to help with any families that might have done any traveling over that time, and to help kind of create a buffer. So maybe, is that something you're considering, is moving the distance learning week to January 4th and then anticipating everyone can start in person the following week?
I will admit it's on the radar of discussions. And I am seeking the thoughts of various leaders within the school and outside the school. I don't want it particularly. I want us back in school. You know, I think these things have a funny life to them, the decisions, because new information comes in. And certainly as we start to see how many people are reporting travel, that could affect this decision. And that's why I do need families to interact with the tool as quickly as possible, as soon as it is out in the coming days. Because you know, if we're talking a handful of families that have done significant travel, I really don't think changing would make much sense, because then sort of everybody, you know, people held back from traveling in hopes of returning, and then you know, so it's not to pit people against each other. Again, I think everyone has made thoughtful decisions, done what's best for their family, but I don't lean towards doing that, but it is on the radar, to answer your question.
Okay, I believe
Yarden?
that Yarden was next. Yep.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can't see you. I can hear you.
Hey. Sorry.
That's okay.
Quick question is this: I'm just trying to just gain a little bit of better understanding of kind of what you're thinking about school opening, or under what circumstances. So, if things were the same as they are now, would school be open on January 4th?
That's a great question, and not really an easy one to answer, because what they are now isn't really a thing, because what they are now might be reported a little bit different in a couple weeks.
Well, let's put it this way: if we were on January 4th, we think that they're the same as what we think today.
If they're the same today as they are that day, then it will mean that there has been some flattening, meaning the measures if we see evidence that I think this is the best answer to your question, Yarden. If we see evidence that the measures that the state is taking and/or vaccine happening, even though that would be really soon for that to take effect, then yes. Because what we're really looking for is that the community the wider community is taking this seriously, and that COVID is not on a exponential down or upward trend, bad trend. That's what we're looking to change. And I can't imagine that yes, travel might have an impact, but I can't imagine that the mitigation methods of closing public spaces isn't going to help us to some extent. So I am, even if you say the way things look, if the snapshot today were exactly the same, but we clearly are seeing evidence that the measures are working, the answer is probably yes, we would open. You're on mute, but does that address your question?
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
No problem. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.
I assume this is not Maddie Abelson, but if Maddie has a question, she can. No, it's probably Stephen and Alyssa.
Sorry.
It's under Maddie.
Steven.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
First of all, thank you all for everything you've been doing. You mentioned just a couple times about the vaccine, and I was just curious. I know we're not there yet, but you know, like hopefully we will be fairly soon. Have you guys discussed that as a leadership team in terms of you know, guidance to the school? What you would, I mean, I think it's going to be mostly for adults as far as what I've read, but you know, are you going to ask teachers to take it? Are you guys going to take it? Do you want the parents to take it? Are you going to, you know, try and ask people in a gentle way to do that?
Yeah, I don't have concrete policies yet.
Right.
Thankfully, Katie we have a real health professional who really understands COVID and who is hooked into the state, you know, health system. And we will really follow this first and foremost, you know, recommendations from the state and from the the CDC in terms of where schools fall in terms of priority and who should be vaccinated. So we're going to need a lot of outside scientific help. I'm guessing this will be a whole new wave of a process for us, understanding it, and new controversies that will come with it. I'm anticipating those. We have not started to tackle them yet, no. Thankfully, we will have a lot of schools to learn from, a lot of guidance, I'm hoping, around the vaccine. And so more on that later, but no, we haven't started discussing that quite yet, because we're still trying to, I'm looking at things. I know I've mentioned the vaccine a couple of times, but I'm still looking at things as, what do we do with no vaccine until that's really rolling and we see the efficacy of it. Allison?
Oh, actually, Yoni, before Allison, Tamar Green has a question. She didn't know how to raise her hand on the computer, but she's been waiting. Tamar, hold on. There you go, Tamar.
I've been outed as my lack of technical savvy here.
Sorry.
That's okay. So my question actually, 3 parts, and feel free to take or not take whatever you want. We are not in school. We are a distance learning family, and it's been great for us. So thank you so much for making that an option. I have a suppressed immune system, and we have 2 friends who were intubated in comas for a month each. So all of this frames where we're coming from. And I'm not trying to stir the pot, but just also name my concern, because it's more than just our family. I care deeply about this community and every member of it. So that kind of is the background framing for my questions. I heard just reference to that it may be possible for children to come to school, even if there's a potential parent exposure. I would love for you to speak to that, 1. 2 is, what would lead you, if not this current metric, to keep school closed? What would lead you for Pikuach Nefesh to say we're not keeping the school open at this moment in time? And again, just wondering about the faculty. How are the faculty feeling about their potential exposures as well? And none of this is to stir the pot, but just, addressing these pieces from a place of deep care for the community.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with thank you. I'll start with the kind of more concrete one, which is just the exposure question. That is really all by the book. That would be considered like third-hand exposure. I mean, it would be potentially second-hand exposure if a parent was actually tested positive. But if they're told that they've had exposure and they're showing no symptoms, that has not been recommended as a cause that a household member should consider that they are at risk. Just so that's just following like standard protocol. So just to make sure that that's clear, and that's something that if you were, I'm happy to kind of show you more guidelines on that, but it is not felt like a risk in our immediate sphere. And anytime that there is, and obviously if there's symptoms, we would pretty much look at it as that they have COVID. So it's not, and again, we follow the guidelines, and this is more of a case-by-case situation, but we would not probably need to keep students home in that case. But that's a very specific example. We've mostly just been going by the book on those. I think we've had an abundance of caution for the most part in our decision making to kind of answer your question about, are you skirting a line that could be risky? What would make us close? Again, I think a big, one is we have to try to follow the lead of the experts that we're trusting. And many of them are coming out and saying that schools, particularly K through 5, we haven't differentiated middle school as much in this conversation. I brought it up once, but that schools can be open during surges. They can be open when COVID is out there. The kids are not really transmitting it. And if adults are not gathering in the building and they're with students, then their exposure is to kids, not to each other. And that's something we need to continue to work on, is making sure that there isn't an overabundance of adults in the building. But again, I think when we get to talk about a statewide out of control trends, which is what we were kind of seeing, exponential out of control trends without any measures really being strict measures being put in place in the state until very, very like right before Thanksgiving. That was a deep concern for me and part of the cause for stepping back and putting the brakes on. And I would do that again under similar circumstances. Lax mindset in the state, out of control numbers, and dangerous levels of hospitalizations that don't seem to be coming under control. But again, just looking from a scientific standpoint, the exposure has been very low in schools, and schools are just not seeing a ton of COVID in the building. So how are faculty? I'm probably not the right, even though I'm in touch with faculty and I'm meeting with them, I think there is a danger in my answering that question. I don't think that you could say faculty are all in one place. Before we headed into the week before Thanksgiving, I met with all of the teachers by team. So I'm just giving you this from my perspective. I think you need to ask teachers themselves. I can't answer for them, and they're not all going to tell me probably how they're feeling. My sense was there are some who are on one end who feel really fine being in school and much, much preferred and think that it is safe and feel fine and feel safe and don't feel much anxiety around that. There are some who feel really, I'd say some who are the ones who are teaching, some who feel very edgy about it, they feel, and among all of them, I'll say even in that group, I think they feel generally safe when in the building, generally, even when they are working with kids who they might have to go and tie their shoes. But when they get home, they're feeling the anxiety that they had been feeling throughout the day. And that is no small thing. That is not a means it's okay to have school opened thing. So it's something we're constantly trying to navigate, understand, and also balance that there's going to be some of that even when school is open and even when we agree that school should be open. And some of the people that said they felt that way still felt that school should be open. So that's my best answer. I really think that I'm not trying to pander here. I think the teachers have been heroes. I think parents have been heroic and kids. But I really think that teachers are going beyond what the intellect and the heart are going in different places to some extent. Their teacher soul wants to be in school. Every single one of these teachers wants school open and wants to be in school. And I want to say a lot of times I hear from parents and they say, I know you're probably getting pressure from teachers. I have not. Tremendously not heard. I've gotten input from teachers and they've told me how they felt and they've pushed back, but I have not gotten pressure or proactive, anything other than we really want what's best for kids. So that's my best answer. Probably a much deeper topic to go into. Allison Katz.
So you've talked a lot about travel, but what about local gatherings, family gatherings? Is there any sort of reporting for that? I assume not. And what are your thoughts also about people who might be getting help during distance learning because they have jobs and so they're bringing in outside people or family or extended family or whatever? So what are your thoughts about those kinds of things and how that affects school opening?
Yeah. Again, I think we have to look at so very broadly, I would say you're right. We are looking more at travel because it is a visible, kind of newsworthy item. There are rules around it, or more specific quarantine rules rather than don't gather or don't gather over 10. What I'm asking families to do is to not do whatever the CDC is saying to not do. But yes, we are not asking people to report that. Partly, that's going back to the first question or the second question, which is there's just a practicality around that. We can't track all that. Also, we're really resting a lot on good decision-making, being transparent with us that there is has been concern of exposure, tracking symptoms, tracking exposure, and tracking positive tests. So no, we're not really considering tracking large gatherings. I am asking you all right now and pleading with you not to have them. Don't engage with them. This is not the time. and that's the best I can say about that. I think I'm missing the second part of your question, Allison.
About people getting help during distance learning.
Kind of the same thing. I mean, that thankfully there are few enough that we can probably trace every family. But you're saying during the long distance learning weeks. We're just asking families to take the best measures they can, and we're using the same protocols we can. That's something I can consider as a report. Did you have someone come in from out of the household, and did you acknowledge that they are not exposed themselves or have gotten tested for COVID? I haven't looked at that yet. I'll mark it down as something to consider. But I do just ask families that they're using wise decision making. I mean, if you're going to have someone from the outside come in, I think you should know the habits of that person. And perhaps if you want to consider having them tested, I don't think testing is 100% reliable, and I wouldn't let your guard down entirely because of testing. So I think mask wearing, I think distancing is really important. I think you can get help and still have distancing. That's the best we can do, I think, with the people that are getting help in that way. So we're really mostly focused on the travel and our other mitigation methods, which again have been working very well to this point. I think I'm going to take one more question. Again, of course, you can email me and we can gather again down the road. And there will be more written communication, which, yes, we will ask you to sift through. So it looks like the Zook Fishers will take us on home with the last question.
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment and then ask a question. One, I think extending the start date, if people are going to travel, if you extend the travel date, they're just going to travel for longer. So that's just my 2 cents about that. And then what you did this week with getting the kids together outside, I think was great. I'm wondering what other interactions you're going to do like that going forward, especially if the school's closed during the cold weather. I think it serves two purposes. One, the kids get to socialize, which is incredibly important, but it keeps everything within our high literature pod, and it prevents us from getting the pressure where we see our kids needing to socialize going outside of the pod. So it's really a win-win situation. I'm just wondering if you have other things like that planned, and if you could just talk to that for a minute.
Can I clarify, do you mean, before you go on mute, do you mean other things planned should we be in distance longer?
Yes, exactly. And even sort of getting the kids to socialize once they come, but like say school starts up full time, just the aspect of socializing rather than jumping right into full blown on school. Like everybody's been isolated for a long time, and there's definitely going to be an impact on that. So
so those are good questions. I would say in terms of distance, again, we're hoping to not have to go into that for too long a period of time, if any. But we will look at whatever we will look to do whatever we can to provide opportunity. As you might imagine, I am asking for an abundance of caution in terms of small groups being outside as much as possible. I mean, we looked really closely at this. We're having very small groups come in. As you know, kids are coming in twice the whole time. I mean, it's a very small amount. We haven't tackled that yet. So Julian, let me bring it to the teams. I think one thing our teachers and our teacher leaders have done really well in our administration, Maya, Julie, the whole team has done really well as adapting to what we're seeing and what we're anticipating. That includes our student services department with Andrea and Christine. And I really think, you've put the question out there. I think it's for me to bring to the team and to discuss. I think to this point, we've been pretty thoughtful about those kinds of interactions. There's always a good voice for those in our meetings and in our planning sessions, and we'll continue to consider it. I will also just say, we're also starting to just think about what academically should things be back to relative normal next year? What are students going to need? And we're already starting to ask those questions and thinking about how can we structure school to meet students' needs in that way as well, particularly thinking about incoming kindergartners, which I know is not really on the minds of that many of the families who are on here, but maybe a few, but also other grades who maybe have missed some academic time or traditional academic time. So yes, I will. I'll put that down as a note to continue to explore. We're definitely open to it. I think we try to get that balance of the social and the community and the holistic health and the rigor of the academics. So we're really going to try to meet all those needs for the students. And teachers are really honestly the experts in the world of what a student needs in a holistic way. Our teachers are really experts, and we will seek their thoughts on that question. I do want to wrap up. You know, we've been here for an hour. I know there's a lot more to talk about. Feel free to email me questions. I will do my best to get back to you as quickly as I can. Of course, anyone on the leadership team you can reach out to. Look out for that tool. It will come in the coming days. It might be a little while. We want to make it useful and good. We'll make improvements as we go. Thank you all for being here tonight, and I think that's a wrap. We'll be in touch, I'm sure, more than you want us to be. Thank you very much, and have a good night.